Relationships are one of the most interesting and often complex things about our characters. They're difficult to master, but if you can, they can be some of the most memorable and relatable things about your characters. So today, in honor of the upcoming release of The Dragon Prince Season 7, I wanted to talk about how that show manages to execute its complicated and varied familial relationships so well. Let's get started. Sup peoples, and welcome back to another video. Now, if this isn't your first time here, you're probably already well aware of the fact that I absolutely love The Dragon Prince. I have a few other videos talking about it and plan to do more after the final release of Season 7, which I cannot wait for. I'm so excited. Just a heads up, for this video, I will be providing spoilers for all of the seasons out so far. So that means spoilers ahead for season 1 through 6 of The Dragon Prince. With that out of the way, let's get started with the Crown Fam. Crown Fam is what I call the family formed of Sarai, Harrow, Ezran, and Callum. Occasionally, I'll include Amaya in it, but for today, I'm just going to be focusing on Ez, Callum, Sarai, and Harrow. Now, part of why I wanted to start with them is that I feel like a lot of times we think of a complicated familial relationship as having to be in a negative light. But you can have a positive familial relationship with someone and it can still be complicated. For example, let's talk about Callum and Harrow. I love their relationship because of its complexity, but also because of its warmth. It doesn't have to be positive or negative. What makes something complex is that it can be both. Callum is Harrow's stepson, and because of that, there is some distance between them, but not in the way you might assume. Callum looks up to Harrow and he loves him. He thinks of him as a father. And Harrow loves Callum very much. He thinks of him as a son. This is where the complexity comes in. Because Harrow cares about Callum, he also worried that stepping in and taking a larger role in the boy's life might alienate Callum's birth father, who passed away when he was young. So Harrow maintained a slight distance between them out of respect, because he didn't want to seem like he was trying to replace Damien, Callum's birth father. Callum, however, was a small child and read this distance as something else. It didn't occur to him that it might have been out of respect for Damien, and therefore will notice little things like the fact that Callum doesn't call Harrow dad very often. He calls him King Harrow, or sometimes even refers to him as your dad when talking to his brother Ezran, who is Harrow's biological son. This adds a level of distance and complexity to their relationship, even though it is still overall a positive one. Harrow loves and cares for Callum and tries to be the best father he can be, even if the way he goes about that can be flawed sometimes. Callum loves and cares for Harrow, even if he isn't sure why there's a level of distance between them. And of course, it makes the letter that Harrow eventually writes for Callum explaining all of this hit even harder when we finally understand why, and when Callum understands why. On the other hand, Ezran thinks of his father as just his father. Their relationship is initially uncomplicated, though I would say it gains a layer of complexity as Ezran gets older. That's because initially Harrow is just Ezran's dad, but later, when Ezran becomes king in the wake of his father's death, he begins to realize the mistakes that Harrow made that led them to this moment. He realizes that his father played a part in forming the conflict that now threatens their home, and he chooses to be a different kind of king. Now, before I wrap up this segment with what we as writers can learn from it, I want to touch on one more relationship within the Crown Fam, the one of the parents, Harrow and Sarai. I really liked in season 2 when we got to see them interact and especially disagree. I often feel like parents are an afterthought, like they're just made to give life to our protagonists and villains, but that's something that the Dragon Prince has never fallen victim to. Instead, they are well-rounded and fleshed out characters that are just as intriguing to learn about as their children are. We get to see this illustrated within the Crown Fam in season 2. During the flashbacks that explained how Sarai was killed, we get to see glimpses of the two of them being together as a happy couple. We get to see her and Harrow disagree and butt heads, and in the end, we get to see her choose to stand by him anyway. The writers managed to add layers of complexity to their relationship in just a few short episodes, showing different aspects of their relationship and the things that they tend to disagree over. It also shows that, at the end of the day, Sarai trusted Harrow enough to stand by him despite disagreement. And later in the chronological timeline, we see Harrow's regrets about what he did. So what can we as writers take away from all of this? Relationships don't have to be negative to be complicated. I would say that Callum and Harrow's relationship, Ezran and Harrow's relationship, and Harrow and Sarai's relationship are all positive, and yet they still contain flaws. I know I didn't really touch on Callum and Ezran's relationship in this video, but it's another good example of a positive but flawed dynamic. Callum can be stubborn and sometimes a bit of a jerk to his younger brother, but he apologizes and he admits when he's wrong, and the two reconcile. They care about each other, but they can still do the wrong thing sometimes and get on one another's nerves. So that is my main takeaway from this family and their dynamics. That a healthy relationship doesn't need to be flawless, just like in real life. That characters who care for each other can still disagree, and that sometimes trying to do right by someone ends up going wrong. Take Harrow and Callum again. Harrow is trying to do right by his son by not replacing his biological father. But in the end, this is a fear he had invented, not something that Callum had actually felt. Sometimes, in your efforts to do the right thing, you end up causing a different problem. In this way, I think it's also important to remember that adults are just people too. A lot of times in media, especially young adult media, the children are the star, and that's fine. But it's important to remember that their parents are people too. They don't turn off when their kids leave the room. Instead, they're living lives too, even if they're ones that we don't see as much of. Alright, so now that we've talked about positive, complicated relationships, let's talk about negative, complicated relationships. And yes, that does mean talking about the Mage Fam. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you probably already know that the Mage Fam are my favorite characters in this entire show. And when I say Mage Fam, I'm referring to Viren, Lissa, Soren, and Claudia. Occasionally also Erebos and Sir Sparklepuff, but I won't be talking about them in today's video. Instead, I want to focus on Viren and his kids. First up, let's talk about Soren and Viren. Probably my favorite dynamic in the entire series. And they are that because of just how complex their dynamic is, and how much it changes over the seasons. When we first meet Soren, he's overly confident and a bit of a bully, but the more we learn about him, the more we start to notice that that's a facade. I would say that yes, Soren is confident, but he's also really insecure, and that's because of his father. That's because of Viren. When Soren was young, he felt deathly ill, and Viren did everything in his power to cure him. But because that meant turning to dark magic, he became someone that his wife Lissa could no longer recognize as the man she fell in love with. In the end, Lissa left, and Viren was left with the children. But instead of acknowledging that this was because of his own actions, Viren blamed Soren. He treated him poorly and was, in his own words, cruel to him. But Soren never understood why, so he just worked harder and harder to try and make his father proud. That was all he ever wanted. This creates a really twisted and complicated dynamic between them, because yes, Viren does love Soren, so much so that he was willing to commit terrible acts to save his life, that he would do anything to save him. However, he also blames these acts on Soren, even though his son never asked them of him, and so is cold and distant towards him. So yes, there is a lot of love in their relationship, but it's not a healthy kind of love. It's not a good thing. It's become twisted and bitter, and eventually Soren realizes that. He realizes that nothing he does will ever be good enough, and that no matter how well his father manages to phrase his requests, Viren is asking Soren to do terrible things. So he leaves, and he chooses to do the right thing instead of what his father says is right. Later, when they meet again, both Viren and Soren have changed a lot. Viren has come to realize the error of his ways, just as Soren had just long before. And when they finally confront each other once again, with both their eyes open, Viren is proud of Soren, but not because of anything that might have made him proud in the past. No, he's proud of Soren because despite everything Viren did, despite everything Viren asked of him, Soren chose the right path. There are two important things in this scene to me. The first of which is that Viren doesn't ask for Soren's forgiveness. He apologizes, he says he was wrong, he says that none of it was Soren's fault, but he doesn't ask for forgiveness, because asking for that would be, in a way, selfish of him. He knows he probably doesn't deserve it, not after everything he's done. He does his best to help Soren in the only way he can now, but he doesn't ask for anything in return. Something else that struck me in the scene was how angry Soren was. Rightfully so. He didn't really believe Viren, because Viren was finally saying everything he wanted to hear when he was younger. So it had to be a trap, right? All of the scenes between them in season 6 are so emotional, it's hard to break it all down without doing an entire video about the complexities of every element. So instead I'm just going to say, what can we as writers take away from this? Sometimes love can go too far. Sometimes it can be twisted. Sometimes families can be unhealthy, not because of hate, but because of twisted love. And those aren't the same thing. Viren loved Soren so much he was willing to do anything for him. But in the end, the actions he took made him bitter, and he blamed that on his son instead of himself. Once again, parents are just people too. They make mistakes. They can be good people or bad people or both. And then on Soren's side, we have so many elements of his personality that have been shaped by his relationship with Viren, even once he's cut his father out of his life. He's good at hiding them, but they're still there. So ask yourself, what is nature with your character and what is nurture? And where do those lines blur? Would Soren always have been so goofy? Or was it partly a defense mechanism to hide how he's really feeling? I honestly think that's a little bit of both. Now, aside from Viren and Soren, I also wanted to talk about Viren and Claudia, because when there is a parent with multiple children, their dynamic with each of them will be different. It's not like Viren's relationship with Soren would also be his relationship with Claudia, and I think that's important to remember. Viren loves Claudia in that same I would do anything for you way, except the difference is that he lets her in more than he let his son in. He teaches her magic, and the pair of them appear far closer in the show than Viren and Soren do. He even apologizes to her at one point when he gets snappish, which he never does to Soren, until he's like in his redemption arc phase. And through this, Claudia inadvertently learns from Viren, and the things that she accidentally learns from him are far more sinister than the things he tries actively to teach her. She learns the same kind of twisted love, where you would do anything for someone, however dangerous, however vile. She learns, through dark magic, to view magic beings as parts instead of living creatures. And when Viren later learns this, he's horrified, saying that yes, he would do anything for their family, but he doesn't want that in return. He was saying it as a parent saying he would do anything for his child. He doesn't want his child to do that for him. On top of this accidental learning, I also think it's important to point out different kinds of twisted love. Soren and Viren have a dynamic where Viren's love turned bitter, making him cruel. And in turn, Soren's love for his father became more painful, something he tried not to feel to protect himself. Meanwhile, Claudia and Viren's love is twisted in a different way. For Claudia, it pushed her to do more and more terrible things, even ignoring what Viren wanted in the end, which was to spend his final days peacefully with her. She can't let him go, even when he wants her to. Meanwhile, on the other end of things, Viren's love for Claudia and his family blinds him. He thinks it's an excuse for every awful thing he does. He thinks that so long as he does it for love, it's all right, that he's not in the wrong. It's only once he realizes the effects of his actions, however motivated, have had on the people that he loves, that he is able to move in any way towards redemption. So once again, what can we, as writers, learn from this? We can learn that families are able to be complicated in more than one way. We can learn that families are able to be messy in both positive and negative ways. We can learn that complicated is, well, complicated. And we can learn that there is more than one kind of love. The options aren't love or hate. There's a myriad in between. And if you've sat through this entire video, I think we both know that I'm not referring to the difference between romantic and platonic love, because there are more than just them too. So when you're writing a family dynamic, don't just think, what is parent A like and what is parent B like? Instead, ask yourself how parent A and parent B are connected. What is their dynamic like? How does that dynamic affect their kids? What is parent A's connection to child A like? And how is that different to their relationship with child B or child C? And instead of asking yourself, is it positive or negative? Ask yourself what the positive things about it are and what the negative things about it are. Because a complicated and realistic dynamic will have both. Viren loves Claudia very much and he supports her in her pursuit of magic, teaching her everything he can. This is positive. However, he also puts her in difficult situations and asks her to do bad things with this power he's given her, without thinking about how this might affect her. This is negative. Take their final interaction, for example. Viren realizes he's led Claudia down the wrong path, and decides to leave and go back to Catalyst to face justice. He does this because he hopes that it will help lead Claudia down the right path. However, he is also leaving her when she is hurt and directionless, begging him to stay. There are positives and negatives in just this single interaction. He is trying, and that is a positive, but is he trying in the right way? Or is actions going to have the desired effect? So that's what we can take away from the familial relationships in The Dragon Prince. That there are few relationships that are just bad, and few that are just good. All relationships are a combination of both. And it's all about building out that spider web of connections, of positives and negatives. And that spider web of complexity is what's going to make your character's dynamics compelling. What's next? next, you might ask? Well, next I would say that you should use the hashtags #continuethesaga and #giveusthesaga on your social media when posting anything about the Dragon Prince so that Netflix will give us Arc 3 because I need that desperately. But also, you could check out one of these two videos, which are both also about the Dragon Prince. Only talking about Arc 1 currently, but I plan to do videos on Arc 2 at some point as well. And I would also say to subscribe, because next week I will be posting a video about how to write romantic relationships based on the Dragon Prince. So yes, basically I'm making an entire video about Raylan, but I think it'll be a lot of fun. So until then, I hope this video helped, and I will see you on the next page.